Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this event featuring the Indigenous Media Solutions Journalism Collaborative. This partnership was formed between JHR and a number of Indigenous outlets and freelancers earlier this year. They were brought together to write stories based on human rights and about Indigenous sovereignty and land back. Now, land back is an ongoing movement, and no one project or response on its own will restore Indigenous sovereignty or rights. The collaborative members work together to report on the ways in which Indigenous peoples are fighting for sovereignty and land reclamation, and what can be learned from communities, solutions, and successes. And we just recently launched the website featuring all of the collaborative members' stories, so I will share that with you in the chat as well. So after this webinar, you can go and take a look at all of the incredible stories that they have produced. And I'll just briefly introduce myself. My name is Kim. I am the Solutions Journalism Trainer for the western parts of the country. And while we're waiting today to introduce everyone else, if everyone here wanted to put in the chat where you are coming from today and your name, we would love to know more about you. And so now I will let the collaborative members themselves just introduce them briefly. If we could start with Meaghan.
Hi everyone, my name is Meaghan Brackenbury. My pronouns are she, her. I am situated as a guest on the territory of the Yellowknives Dene in Yellowknife Northwest Territories. I am a reporter with Cabin Radio, which is a small independent upstart media organization that does multimedia coverage throughout the Northwest Territories, and I'm thrilled to be here today.
Thank you, Meaghan, and I'll hand it over to Oscar. Oh, Oscar, whose son has just woke up. Oscar is a freelance journalist, and hopefully he will be able to come back and answer some questions for us a bit later. Callie, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Callie Giaccone. My pronouns are she, her, and I work for the Eastern Door as a production assistant, copywriter, and reporter.
Thank you, and I'll hand it over to Brandi.
Tanse. My name is Brandi Morin. I'm coming to you from Treaty 6 territories on the lands of my ancestors from the Michelle First Nation. And I'm a freelance journalist. I do mostly national and international work and all Indigenous based stories, and my pronouns are she, her.
Great. And Steve, I'll pass it over to you.
Oops, I pressed the wrong button. Sego Zelaguego, my pronouns are he, him. I come from Ganasadaga Mohawk territory. I'm currently on Ganawage Mohawk territory, running the Eastern Door newspaper. I'm the editor publisher. And very excited about this collaboration. So.
Great. And Laurence?
Yes, hello, my name is Laurence. I use the pronouns she, her. I'm situated in Untitled, also known as Montreal. I'm a reporter with the Eastern Door, and I primarily report on the Gingigeha community of Ganasadaga.
Thank you. And Marisela?
Yes, hi everybody. My name is Marisela Amador. I am the assistant editor and reporter at the Eastern Door. It's been quite a journey that we've embarked on, and it's really exciting to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you. And Oscar, do you have a moment now to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, Gwe. Nina Dalawasi, Oscar Baker III. I'm Black and Mi'kmaq from Elsipogtog First Nation, but currently working from my partner's reserve in Indian Island here in Mi'kmaq. I'm a freelancer, and just great to be here today. Sorry if I pop in and out. My partner's running a little late, and I have my 4-month son with me, so hopefully he doesn't chime in too much.
Great, thank you so much everyone for being here today. And I'll just make a quick note about the schedule of the webinar. We will first go through some prepared questions for the panelists, and then we will open it up to audience questions. So audience, if you ever have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat at any time. And when we get to the question period, I can pose those questions to our panelists. All right, so we've got a lot to talk about today, so I'm going to jump right into the questions here. The first question we have is for Brandi, and that is, why did you decide to join the collaborative?
Hi, thank you for the question. So I have been working with Journalists for Human Rights for over a year now. I've had the opportunity to mentor Indigenous people from Northern Ontario that are interested in getting involved in the media. So I really love what JHR does. And so when this opportunity came up, it was a no-brainer because I'm a freelancer, but even as an Indigenous journalist or maybe any journalist of color, I often find that we have to fight for our stories. We have to fight to convince media outlets and editors that our stories are worthwhile, that they're, that they matter to the mainstream, and that for them to put the resources behind it. And so when this opportunity came up for JHR to invest in us, in Indigenous storytellers to go out and curate stories that we are passionate about and want to share, I just took advantage of that because it's something that didn't come up very often. And at the same time, it was amazing because not only was JHR supporting us with the resources that we may need financially and other supports, but they were also giving us the freedom with what we created to be able to pitch that to different publishers in order to get our stories out there and also be compensated for our work in that way. So it's absolutely incredible. And also because of all of these, all of us coming together, freelancers and different news outlets, I don't think that happens very often. And so we're more powerful when we're together, and to be able to create, these lines of stories that we created and to have it promoted by JHR. So that's why I got involved.
And the work that has come out of the collaborative has been so incredible. I've loved reading every story. And I did drop the link to the collaborative website into the chat for everyone here to be able to take a look at these beautiful and very important stories that have come out of this project. And the next question I have here is for Oscar. And that is, what have you learned while working as part of a collaborative? Because as Brandi mentioned, this is something a little bit unusual for journalists. How was it different from your regular reporting? And how was bringing in SOJO, solutions journalism, a little bit different?
Yes, certainly learning to work with a lot of different organizations, a lot of different minds. As a freelancer, I find that I don't always have other professional journalists to bounce ideas off of, which is very valuable for me, being part of this collaborative, thinking not just about the stories that I want to report on, but also how to promote them, how to start seeing how my storytelling can go across Turtle Island and the country as a whole. As far as solutions journalism, when I first started in solutions journalism, I started working for a company, a startup called Wicked Ideas. And I guess my idea of solutions journalism was just highlighting people trying to tackle issues within their community, which could kind of come off as fluff pieces. But thanks to the solutions journalism training and workshop that JHR offered, I was able to start seeing solutions journalism not as just fluff pieces, but as a way to challenge the different voices you speak to on how they're trying to solve those problems that they're seeing within their community and within that they have a vested interest in. So you're detailing a story in a more well-rounded way. And I think that's brought a level of further scrutiny for me when approaching stories across the board, to start asking everybody, all the voices involved, what are they doing to try and solve them, and where are the limitations within the solutions that they're offering for the issue. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's so important to highlight that solutions journalism is rigorous reporting, but now instead of focusing on the problems, we're focusing on the solutions to those problems, which is an incredibly important part of the whole story, which I think sometimes gets a little bit left behind when we're so used to getting wrapped up in focusing on problems. But solutions journalism really allows us to highlight the agency of Indigenous communities and really showcase their strength in how they're responding to these types of problems. And for the next question here, what can be gained from collaborations between smaller newsrooms across the country? First, I will ask Meaghan for her opinion on this question from Cabin Radio.
Yes, well, thank you so much for giving me the space to share my thoughts. Yeah, so as I had mentioned, Cabin Radio is a very small startup newsroom. We're only 3 years old, so we're pretty young. And sometimes I find that when you're working in a smaller newsroom in a daily news environment, you can get caught in the weeds a little bit, looking at the solely the intricacies of the communities that you cover. And while of course community journalism and local journalism is absolutely necessary and important, and all communities deserve to have rigorous media reporting on their communities, it can also be extremely helpful to look at what other smaller newsrooms are doing to widen that scope a bit, to widen that local context and look at the larger context of the stories that you are working on. Looking at local context, again, extremely important. But if you widen the context from that local lens, you can only strengthen your own reporting and better understand how issues and solutions that you're seeing in your own community are reflected or similar to other issues and solutions in other communities, which again can only make your own critical thinking about those solutions stronger. And of course, from a more like personal standpoint, it's always nice to have a sounding board in another newsroom that is able to sympathize with your experience in terms of tackling these stories. It was amazing to get to know all of these other journalists who are doing incredible work. And not only were we all looking for solutions to issues together, but I found that it was helpful in finding solutions to our own just reporting methods together, and having each other to chat to and bounce ideas off of and take suggestions from.
Yeah, there's a lot of knowledge in this collaborative, so it's great that you were all able to share it with each other and build each other up in your reporting. Also for this question, I will ask for one of the journalists from the Eastern Door to respond. What can be gained from collaborations between smaller newsrooms?
Yes, so I'll be answering that one. Thank you, Kimberly. Without getting too repetitive by repeating anything Meaghan said, because absolutely everything she's highlighted is so important within this collaborative. So I think that first and foremost, what this collaborative project has really shown us, it's just how much it proves that how beneficial collaborations can be in any type of, when it comes to any type of work done in journalism. And in this specific instance, we had the chance of connecting smaller community newsrooms as well as freelance reporters pushing for community-centered stories really on the national scale. And so what this resulted in really was a series of reporting that was inspired by the knowledge and lived experiences of Indigenous people right across the country. And I think that's really evident when you look at all the stories that came out. And not only did this collaboration enable us to really bring these important stories to light, I think it also really allowed us to learn from one another and really gain this perspective, as Meaghan highlighted before.
Great, thank you so much. I will move on to the next question now. How can using solutions journalism strengthen reporting around land back and other Indigenous issues? And Oscar, I'll hand this one over to you first.
Yeah, I think solutions journalism can strengthen reporting around land back or other Indigenous issues by really centering the conversation around how people are already trying to solve issues within our communities. I think when it comes to Indigenous representation in media, a lot of us hear our community members say, we just don't hear enough positive stories around our communities. Everything is always negative. And in many ways, solutions journalism, although we stray away from just trying to report fluff piece stories, it is good to highlight how we're solving our own issues within our communities. And as a Mi'kmaq reporter, I think speaking to other Indigenous people within the community who are doing that work, they're oftentimes facing down problems that I care about too. And I think when we talk about how Indigenous journalists operate within community, when you care about a certain subject matter, sometimes your questions can be more informed than someone else who might feel like they're parachuting in to try and tackle these issues. So I think solutions journalism can kind of lay the groundwork to try and find more people who are working to solve those issues. And also it gives other people, other communities across Turtle Island, maybe insight in how to start solving those issues in their own backyards. And that gives me hope that we're building steps forward for thriving communities. Thank you.
And Meaghan, if you'd like to add your perspective to this question.
Yeah, of course. I mean, everything that Oscar said, of course, was right on the money, and I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, to effectively further any movement, but particularly the land back movement, I mean, it's necessary to understand the action that's being taken around it. I really see solutions journalism as kind of bridging the gap between words and action, because a lot of the time there's a lot of rhetoric about the issues or what needs to be done, but it's just as important to actually evaluate and examine what is being done to actually solve those issues or move the movement further. So yeah, I really see it as kind of bridging the gap between words and action in a meaningful way, and understanding and evaluating solutions in practice is what makes action meaningful. It can be, as Oscar said, incredibly helpful for people elsewhere with similar struggles to see what's working or what is not to shape their own actions. And of course, as Oscar mentioned, encouraging optimism is extremely important, because you need to have optimism to be able to have the stamina to continue working on these long-term issues.
Definitely. And Laurence, I see you raised your hand.
Sorry, I wasn't sure how I was allowed to raise my hand, but I just thought that to add on to this, I think that solutions journalism also proves as a really meaningful way to engage with readers in a way that, they then can find those opportunities to also apply solutions to whatever stories they might also be relating to. So I just thought I'd add that.
Yeah, I think a lot of the collaborative members have mentioned how they've been able to learn from each other during this experience. And I think it's kind of mirrored in solutions journalism. Communities can learn from each other when we're sharing these types of stories, especially because each solutions piece is going to need to contain insights, lessons that other communities or other people can take from these stories. And so sharing those solutions is also very empowering in that way, I think. I'll move on to the next question here. What do Indigenous journalists and media need to thrive? And I'll hand this one over to Brandi first.
Thank you. So we need opportunities like this, and we need editors and media to invest in us and believe in us and encourage us and hire us, as we always say, to really see the opportunity that's there for Indigenous journalists to, rewrite the history that wasn't written for us, so to say, wasn't truthfully written for us, and to document authentically, you know, our stories and showcase them, you know, to the mainstream, because ultimately the media has such power to help shift the narrative, not only in, you know, the government world and lawmaking and policy making worlds, but in the grassroots world, in the academic world. And so I just think that we just need as much support as possible, and to let us run with our ideas, because we know the stories that are out there and the stories that need to be told. And there are so many stories out there that are waiting, that are beautiful and needed and meaningful in order to help bring justice about, but also to bring us together across Turtle Island.
Yeah, I think what you said, Brandi, was so important. Stories are really real and really powerful. So it's so important to have those Indigenous voices telling those stories. And I will also ask the journalist from the Eastern Door to respond to this question.
So apparently I'm up. I'll just say yes to everything Brandi said. There you go. No, I'm just kidding. It's people in Canada need to listen to our stories and understand our issues better. So just to kind of go along those lines, you know, we here at the Eastern Door, I mean, we're an independent media, native media. So we get a chance week in, week out to tell those stories, good and bad. We know the community, we know what to share, we know how to tell them. But we're few and far between, because there's not that much independent native media, native owned media in our communities. So that's a scary thing, because we need more of that. But for Indigenous journalists and stories to get out there, people need to be more receptive in the country, you know, in Canada. They need to learn more and understand that if we're telling you something, you know, it's important for you to listen. Because I always tell people, look, you know, reporters, especially young reporters, say, if you're not interested, or if you don't know anything about our communities, then you can't really call yourself a great reporter, because you're missing a whole section of the country, the original peoples, the original stories of this land. And, you know, those things have to be amplified. So it's up to the young reporters, it's up to the universities, it's up to the, you know, the up and coming journalists to bring those stories out, even if they're not Indigenous. You know, I know sometimes people say, well, we'd rather Indigenous journalists tell our stories. Sure, but we need to be able to report on our issues. And if we don't have enough Indigenous journalists, as you see at the Eastern Door, we have non-native journalists working for us, and they worked out really well, because they were under my guidance. They know the community, they came and saw for themselves, they learned, they listened, they're excellent. So there's a lot of room to grow in this way.
Thank you. And speaking about how stories and the power of stories, now we will hand it back to our collaborative members to speak a little bit about the work that they did produce. So if you just wanted to tell us a little bit about, you know, why you decided to write this story, the impact it has had, how focusing on solutions has made it a little bit different. And first I'll ask Brandi to speak, and Brandi wrote a very powerful story about alliances that are coming out of the Fairy Creek blockades.
Thanks. So when I pitched to do this story, it was kind of right at the height when the mainstream was becoming aware of what was happening in Fairy Creek, and a lot of the arrests were starting to happen. And I wanted to get there because I knew that there were Indigenous nations there that were affected, and there was also some Indigenous like land defenders there, and I wanted to get their perspective. And I knew that it would be very difficult for me to get there through a news source that could literally fund me to go there from Alberta all the way to Vancouver Island. That's a huge expense. So I thought this was such an important story, and I needed to come up with the solutions and to it. So I had to do some thinking and get more creative than usual than just going and reporting on the front lines of, this. But I've always been fascinated about the allyships that are, that have been unfolding in the last several years between non-Native allies that are supporting Indigenous like land defenders and land back, the land back movement. And so I wanted to see how that was unfolding there. And that's what I pitched. I didn't know who I was going to meet or what I was, what was going to happen when I went there, but that was the idea. I knew that these allyships were happening. And so it was approved, and I got an editor that took it on that was going to publish my story, which was Ricochet Media. And they're like this real badass revolutionary kind of like media outlet that really support Indigenous writers. So it was really fast because I had just agreed to do this collaboration just a few weeks before. And then I found this opportunity, this story. And so I traveled there, and I was there for about a week, and, documented what was happening with these allyships. And it wasn't necessarily all like, oh, flowery, and there was a lot of it's a kind of like it's a messy process because we have all of these historical discord that has happened between us. And so that's playing out a little bit on the front lines, even though these non-Native allies have these good intentions because they're so passionate about this forest, this ancient forest that is being threatened by a logging company to log some trees that are thousands of years old for basically like shingles and, decking on decks. Something that's going to, after 20 or so years, is going to be gone. And yet these trees there have been witness to so much in their lifetime and witness to pre-contact, and they have sustained, so much in the areas that they are. So it was really fascinating to understand the dynamics between what's happening with the traditional Indigenous peoples of those territories and the conflicts within their own territories, which we see a lot that are often happening between these corporations and governments that come in and offer large sums of money to these communities that are often living in enforced poverty. And then you have more traditional people that want to keep these sacred places of theirs intact, for now and future generations. And then you have these non-Native people coming in and so passionate, and sometimes they want to overstep and, try to, they're passionate about leading, but they're also learning about what it's like to work alongside these Indigenous land defenders that have come, to these front lines. So yes, I was able to write this story. I would have not been able to go there under other circumstances unless some sort of media outlet as a freelancer could offer me, a couple $1,000s to cover the cost to go and travel and do all that. So I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity to go and witness that, because this is a significant piece of history. And this is something that is very, very important. And I'm just so grateful that I got to do that. And if you want to check it out, it's on the Ricochet website. What is my actual, I got to see, what is it called? Just let you guys know. I thought I had the website pulled up. It's called.
I can add the direct link in there too. I've got it here.
Yeah, it's called at Fairy Creek, Indigenous settler allyships are complicated, but they're working. And so I've been following this story ever since, and I've been busy with other projects and stuff, but it's likely that I won't be able to go back there unless I'm funded in some way. So I understand that this was an exceptional opportunity that I wouldn't have otherwise had. And it's important to have an Indigenous storytellers on the ground. We had IndigiNews, and IndigiNews is amazing, and they're a part of this collaborative, and they are there. They're close to there. So again, I was thankful, and that was my story. Thank you.
You guys can all check that out. Jordan just dropped the link to that story in the panel or in the chat, and it is also on the collaborative website. The link I also dropped in the chat. And Steve, I can see you would also like to speak about the stories that the Eastern Door produced. The Eastern Door, they wrote a story on vaccines and shelter for the unhoused in Montreal, and also a story on dealing with the housing crisis.
Well, I was actually hoping to talk about our land claim story. I think Laurence can speak more about the unhoused and the vaccines, but I will say that the one we just produced this past week was on land claims. I think it was close to 6,000 words. It was 4 journalists, including myself, and I've gotten a lot of feedback from the community. And as we know as journalists, oftentimes we don't know how we're doing because nobody says anything unless they're giving us hell. So I think we're doing a good job on this one. I think we did a good job, and basically wanted to explore just that whole thing of what is land claims, what is land back, what does it all mean, and it's only through never. I mean, although we wanted to give time to that, what time do we have? Like, we don't have any time really to produce a 6,000 word article, but we made the time, and it was pretty well. There's different words I could use. At times we were pulling our hair out sometimes, and trying to meet our deadline, and like people not getting back to us, and the story changed a couple times, and we minused and we added to it, but at the end of the day, I'm very proud of it and very proud of my journalists. And I think it's an example of what you could do if you believe in something and you want to portray something and tell people something, not just our readers, but there's other people that are reading this. Like, this is going to come out to everybody. Obviously, the website's launched now, and we're going to be putting it on our website soon, in a couple of days, or actually tomorrow. So, it has a reach. It's going to have a reach, I think, farther than where we necessarily thought it would. And, I think stories like that, this project like this, getting together, collaborating on it, having the support, so important. I think it has to happen more. It has to happen on many different scales. And it goes back to what Brandi was talking about, supporting Indigenous journalists. And, I take my hat off to everybody that's part of this, because it was awesome.
Great, thanks, Steve. I look forward to reading that article. Does anyone else from the Eastern Door want to chime in about their stories?
Well, I want to speak briefly about a story that's actually coming out this week. We were a little late, but Marisela and I have collaborated on a comparison solution story with the land claim and the land issues that are happening in Kahnawake, comparing it to what happened in Caledonia, I guess in the last 14 months. And so I think this is a really good example of grassroots movements kind of overcoming a lot and kind of disregarding the inaction of government. And I think that that's a theme that's come up a lot during this panel as well, is that, a lot of really great and awesome projects and a lot of change can come from the grassroots level, and it doesn't always have to happen at a federal or a governmental level as well. So I think that that's something that solution journalism really points out, is that, those kinds of positive movements can come about at a very hands-on level.
And there are still a few solution stories from the collaborative forthcoming. And as soon as those are up, we will also be sharing them on the collaborative website. So you can check the stories out there once they are available. And Meaghan, would you like to speak to your stories at all? The stories from Cabin Radio. They wrote a story on a mural painting festival that showcased Indigenous strength, a Yellowknife healing camp, and how the Dene Nation launched its own rapid housing initiative.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so my land backstory is forthcoming because the Northwest Territories is currently dealing with its biggest COVID-19 outbreak that it's ever had. So that really complicated matters in terms of like traveling and reporting. So hopefully in the next month or so, things will have settled down a bit and it will be safe to travel so that I can get that out. But I will talk about that story a bit, but just briefly looking at the stories that I was able to write for the time being. Yeah, I was lucky enough to get to go to a mural painting festival for the Strong People, Strong Communities project that was launched last year, kind of as a response to missing and murdered Indigenous women. And the idea behind the project was uniting youth artists, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, with Indigenous artists from across the country. They put them in 6 teams, and there were 6 themes that they were painting around. So strong, healthy men and women, strong, healthy families, strong, healthy elders. And those murals will be put up around Yellowknife, as well as the Yellowknife's Dene communities of Dilo and Deda. And the idea behind that was telling positive Indigenous stories and empowering ones, because as people were speaking about on the panel before, often we see kind of stories of victimhood about Indigenous people, but this was instead showcasing their strength and resilience and their beauty and creativity. So I was lucky enough to get to go there and take lots of pictures and talk to the artists. And there's a video as well of the Strong Healthy Women mural team describing their piece. It was really, really lovely. And I also did a story about, yeah, the Arctic Indigenous Wellness Foundation has an urban healing camp in Yellowknife. They run a plethora of programming. They've got traditional counseling, and they have had like hide tanning workshops and things there for people to participate in. But one of their longest standing programs is an on the land breakfast program, where they'll actually drive downtown, pick up people who are experiencing homelessness, who might be coming out of an overnight shelter, and drive them to the camp, where they're given breakfast and coffee and access to the services at the camp, and are able to make connections with each other and the workers. And I think really the crux of that story, I went there for a few hours one morning and got to speak with the people who were there that morning, as well as the workers themselves. And I think the really, really powerful thing about the urban healing camp is that a lot of the people, or all of the people who work there, were homeless at one point, or struggled with addiction at one point. So they really understood personally what it was like to have that experience, and then were better able to care and sympathize for the people who were accessing their services, and kind of the power that comes from having someone who's seen the other side of it, being the one to help you through that journey. So that was very powerful. My land backstory, again, put on hold because of COVID, unfortunately, a little bit, but still working away at it. It's about Indigenous guardianship initiatives in the NWT, and then I've spoken to a couple other across Canada to kind of compare and contrast what's working for those. And as I've learned speaking to Indigenous guardianship initiatives and people involved in the field, is that it's really an area that encompasses a whole bunch of different issues. I mean, obviously, it's Indigenous nations inserting their sovereignty on their land and caring for the land the way they see is appropriate and healthy. So it's important for nationhood. It's important for culture, reconnecting youth with elders who know the land really well, and bringing people out on the land to berry pick or fish or make dry fish, and really reconnecting people with their culture. And of course, it's an important response to climate change. We all know that Indigenous responses to climate change are the best out there, and that they're really the leaders when it comes to stewarding the land and protecting the environment that they have been on for time immemorial. So it's been really, really wonderful and humbling to get to work on this story and talk to so many different people in the field. Also interesting to kind of look at the very simple idea of just wanting to protect and steward the land, and how that gets like endlessly complicated with policies and legislation and agreements and government disagreements and devolution and everything like that. So it's a very complex web, which contains some very simple ideas. So anyways, that story is forthcoming, and I look forward to being able to move around so that I can actually finish it and put it together.
And I think it's so incredible that these journalists were able to produce this type of work during COVID times, because that is just an extra added complication on top of everything else. Oscar, do you have a moment to talk about your story, or are you a little indisposed?
He's a little cranky, but I do have a moment. This is my son, Wilquest. He's 4 months old, and he was born during the time that I was taking part of this collaborative. So as a new parent, I had to take some time away to just be with him and to learn and grow as a father. So, but I say he's good medicine. The story that I was able to produce was about how climate change is threatening Indigenous medicines here in Mi'kma'ki, specifically here in New Brunswick. Two in particular were threatened by the rising temperatures and coastal erosion, being sweetgrass and cedar trees. One of the traditional harvesters I spoke to was saying that because of the heat radiating from the roadways, it was cooking some of the cedar branches, which is very important for some of the ceremonies we have here in Mi'kma'ki, such as cleansing ceremonies, death ceremonies, and among others. Cedar's a particularly strong medicine, but so is sweetgrass. As Mi'kmaq, we consider sweetgrass to be the hair of Mother Earth. And, between Cecilia Brooks, who is the traditional knowledge keeper that I spoke to, and Sophia Sedaris, they don't think that sweetgrass will become very rare in the next 30 years here in Mi'kma'ki. For the solutions lens of things, it was particularly hard to take a look at the response. Many of the people that I spoke to kind of felt overwhelmed by it because it's a planetary issue. I guess Elder Albert Marshall put it best. It's trying to convince industry and the provincial governments that air, soil, and water are essential elements of life here in Mi'kma'ki, and it's trying to convince them that they need to protect it if they're going to continue to do business. But he said, honestly, it's a challenge. But he thinks that if more people throughout Turtle Island began to see air, water, and soil as essential elements of life, that maybe we can try and combat climate change in a more meaningful way. That's the story that I was able to produce. It took a while because I was balancing trying to take care of this guy and among other things, but I was really happy that it came together. Unlike other people, I was able to go out despite of COVID and take some photographs and meet people in person. I always believe through a lot of the traditional knowledge keepers and elders that speak to me that everybody is sacred. So part of my reporting is offering tobacco ties for people taking the time to speak to me. And I felt that that part of ceremony made people a lot more comfortable to speak to me and open up about the kind of fears that they have around climate change and how our medicines were near and dear to the heart. Hold on.
Great, thank you so much for speaking about your stories, everyone. I will just share the link one more time in the chat so that everyone can be sure to go and read those if you haven't already after the webinar is done. This is the part of the Q&A that we will open for audience questions. Because we do have quite a few panelists, I'll just ask the panelists to raise their hand if they are able, and then I can call on you to be able to answer the question. The first question we had here is, can you elaborate on what solutions-based journalism is? I will just answer this one very briefly. Solutions journalism is rigorous reporting on responses to social problems. If you are a journalist and you are interested in learning more about solutions journalism or taking one of the trainings that we offer to newsrooms, I'm just going to drop my email in the chat. If you have any questions about that, you can feel free to reach out to me. But for examples of solutions-based journalism, again, you can take a look at the collaborative website. That is what this collaborative is dedicated to. The next question we have here is from Valerie. And her question is, what advice would you give an aspiring young Indigenous journalist as they aim to start their career? Oh, that was fast. I see Steve with the hand.
It felt like I was on a game show. I was like ready to press my button. I would say it's a tough business, but you know, you just got to stick with it. You gotta have your mind and your heart in the right place, you know, and telling our stories and making a difference in our communities is going to come first and foremost from a young Indigenous journalist, because you grew up seeing these things. You know what has to change. You know, look around you and see what you like and what you don't like, and what you want to report on, what you want to learn more about. So although it's going to be a tough slogging, for sure, it's going to be, if it's going to be a career, it'll take a while to kind of really say, okay, I'm a journalist and I, you know, believe in everything I'm doing. But, you know, it's worth it. I mean, it's been 18 years for me, and I've been reporting on mostly at the beginning of my career with the Cree Nation, and then Ganawagin, Ganasinaga, Algozasne. So mostly Mohawk stories. And I feel that we're making a difference. You know, my reporting, the Eastern Door, we're trying to affect change. So as long as you have the right mindset, stick with it. You know, it's not going to be easy at first. You might even be, you know, called out by your own community. You might, people might say you're not doing a great job, or, you know, have a different opinion than you. So, but that happens. I mean, you know how our communities are. It happens all the time, whether you're a reporter or not. So, tough job. I wish you all the best, all the luck. It's in the right place. You will succeed.
Great, thanks, Steve. And I see Callie, you've raised your hands.
Brandi, I'll be very quick. I know you wanted to say something too. I just wanted to add that I know for, like, particularly at the Eastern Door, what Steve said is absolutely true. And if, for example, you had an idea that you wanted to, like, pitch to the Eastern Door or any, like, Indigenous newsroom, I know that people are always looking for stories and also willing to, like, guide you in the right direction. Like, for example, at the Eastern Door, if you had an idea to pitch, like, we would be very happy to hear about it. Basically any week at any time, like whether or not it could go in right away or if it could be something ongoing, we're always looking for contributors. So if it's something that you like to launch an article, we're always here to listen.
And Brandi? You're muted, Brandi.
I thought I unmuted, sorry. I encourage everybody to pursue a career in media as a journalist. You're needed. If you have this inkling or feel drawn to it, I encourage you to step out and explore it, and start small and work your way up. It's okay to do that. I started with community newspapers, and I got experience covering all sorts of beats. So I would get, you know, do council meetings and, you know, doing little art exhibitions or community events or, you know, human interest, so that I could get well-rounded and hone my craft, so to speak. And opportunities opened up from there. And by doing that, when you are exploring different beats and stuff, maybe you'll discover what you're passionate about and what area you'd like to cover, because I think that you're going to be more successful as a journalist when you have a beat that you are expert in, that editors and people can go to for you on that subject. Not to say that you're going to be limited to that, but I think that you can be stronger, whether that's telling Indigenous stories or environmental stories or, you know, political stories, whatever that is. And just keep all of your options open. Do not be boxed in. If you're working somewhere and you know, you work hard and you learn what you need to learn from that area. And if you're feeling like you're not growing anymore, or you're feeling boxed in, then I encourage you to search for other opportunities. That's what has worked for me and allowed different doors to open, you know, for me. So I just want to encourage you all the way and to reach out to other journalists. Don't be afraid to reach out to other like journalists that you look up to for advice and mentorship and support.
Great, thank you everyone for those answers. Again, if anyone does have a question, you can feel free to drop it into the chat, or you can use the Q&A function. We do have a couple minutes left. If anyone would like to ask a question to our panelists, I'll give just a couple minutes, couple seconds here. While we're waiting to see if anyone has any other questions, maybe I can just ask, what is the biggest piece of learning that you have taken away, either from being part of a collaborative or from using solutions journalism? Oh, I see a couple hands. Callie?
So I would say, like, just at the beginning of learning about solutions, I was really hesitant, if I'm honest, because of that fear of making a fluff piece or forcing something to be positive when it just simply is not. So I guess I've learned how to just look at journalism in a different way completely, and just kind of learn that to present a solution doesn't mean that it's the only solution, and it also doesn't mean that it's the end-all be-all solution, that there can be elements of positivity and solutions within a greater problem. And I think that's the biggest thing that I've taken away from this collaborative, is I've learned that what we're touching on, we're not saving the world, we're just kind of pointing out, you know, what can be like looked at in a more positive way within a bigger issue. And I think that's really important.
And maybe I'll just add that, like, doing this type of work can be really negative and heavy. And especially, like, I have found, like, doing Indigenous stories, it involves a lot of like trauma and injustice and things like that. So taking the solutions oriented approach kind of gives a little bit of hope to some of this stuff, and, you know, lessen some of that load that we're carrying, so that it's not as, you know, heavy and dark. So that's what I like about it, that to always like seek out, okay, what could the possible solutions be, or, you know, those kind of angles, instead of just leaving it as, you know, hopeless. So.
Right, and I think as journalists, we've been so trained, you know, look at the problems, you know, we're told that journalists should act as this watchdog, but it is still incredibly important to remember that there are people out there solving these problems, and no solution is a silver bullet. No solution is going to be perfect, and it's not our job as reporters to find the best or most perfect solution, but to report on the solutions that we do have. Because not only is it hard for readers to constantly be bombarded with negative news, but like Brandi mentioned, it's very difficult for the journalists who are on the ground covering these stories. So one thing we can do for, you know, maybe everyone's mental health is to remember that these solutions are out there, and they deserve just as much time on the page as the problems. And Meaghan, I see you have raised your hand as well.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to add, I mean, you kind of touched on it, but I think one of the things that really stuck with me was right at the beginning when we were being trained on solutions journalism, was talking about, I mean, journalism's all about telling the full picture and then like an accurate portrait of what's happening and finding the truth. And if you're only focusing on the problems and not the solutions, then you're leaving out a very important part of that picture, and you're not necessarily telling an accurate story. So I think kind of reshaping the way that we think about pursuing stories and issues in that way, making sure that if there's a solution out there that we're including it in our coverage, was a really important lesson for me.
Yeah, and I think this is the time, you know, to reimagine journalism and to really question what it should be and who it should be working for and what our goals as journalists should be. And I think a lot of the panelists talked about that here today, about the importance of Indigenous and Indigenous-led media and how important it is to get those stories out into the world. We haven't had any more questions come in, so maybe I'll just ask the panelists if you have any final thoughts, anything you'd like to share before we sign off today. Steve, I see the hand.
Yeah, I'd like to say that, you know, it was refreshing, because although sometimes, you know, we get busy and we have to try to make time and we can't make it to this meeting or this and that. It's just like regular journalism in life. For me, somebody who's been in the business so long, the reason why I've been in this business is because, you know, I have this passion that burns to tell these stories. The day that dies, if that ever does, I'm gone, right? I'm not going to be good anymore. But with something like this, it kind of showed me another side. It inspired me in a different way. And I realized, like, not only with meeting people across the country, some of whom I knew already and some of whom I didn't, but just to be able to kind of bounce things off people, to listen to different story ideas, like, you know, even hearing now the stuff that, you know, was produced by Brandi and Oscar and Meaghan, it's like, wow, that's exciting, you know? And so it really kind of lit a fire under me to say, you know, not only did it lead to all these stories that we did, and with land claims being the biggest one, but it showed me that, you know, there's so many things to think about outside of kind of getting stuck in the day-to-day of, you know, running the Eastern Door and doing what I do. And I always tell young journalists, you know, keep an open mind and look for other things. Oh, well, it happened to me, you know. Here I found JHR in this collaborative, and it was awesome. So I just wanted to say that.
Great, thanks, Steve. And Brandi?
I just want to quickly say, like, what a privilege it was to work with JHR, and I'm so proud of everybody that contributed, and the content that we were able to put out, and the value of that, and the quality is just amazing, guys. So congratulations on everything.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone here, for being a part of the collaborative and for taking time out of your day to come and speak about the stories that you have produced and all of the things that you have learned. Please, everyone, check out the collaborative website to read these stories, share these stories, support these people's works and their outlets. I hope to see more collaboratives coming up across Canada for journalists. I think that this is a huge benefit for everyone involved, journalists, readers. And so I thank everyone for coming today. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and we will sign off now. So goodbye, everyone.